May I have your attention, please? I would like to kindly invite Excellencies and all distinguished guests to be seated as our session will be commenced shortly. Thank you. Before we begin, we wish to inform you that we are live streaming this event via YouTube, and the participant in the live streaming will be given a chance to ask questions during the discussion session. Please be informed that Wi-Fi is available in this room with the username of asean.guest, which need no password. We would also kindly request you to switch off your mobile phone or switch them to silent mode. Thank you. His Excellency Kung Fook, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN for ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community, His Excellency Mr. Igor Drismans, EU Ambassador to ASEAN, Committee of Permanent Representative, Ambassadors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning to you all. It is indeed a great honor for us to welcome you to the Nusantara Hall of the ASEAN Secretariat for the launching of the ASEAN Integration Report 2019. This report will present the progress and achievement in ASEAN economic integrations since the adoption of the AEC Blueprint 2025 in 2015. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, may we kindly invite His Excellency Kung Fook, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN for ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community, to deliver his remarks. DSG, the floor is yours.
His Excellencies Igor Drisman, Ambassador of the European Union to ASEAN, Excellencies Ambassadors, members of the Diplomatic Corps, and guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. Welcome to the launch of the ASEAN Integration Report 2019. The report is a flagship publication of the ASEAN Integration Monitoring Directorate of the ASEAN Secretariat and is one of the public output of AEC monitoring efforts as guided by the AEC 2025 Monitoring and Evaluation Framework. It was first launched in 2015 in time for the establishment of the ASEAN Economic Communities. The second report presents the state of ASEAN economic integration, focusing on progress achieved since the adoption of the AEC Blueprint 2025 4 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, the ASEAN Economic Community was established in 2015 as one of the 3 pillars of the ASEAN communities. Since then, the region economic integration agenda has been guided by the AEC Blueprint 2025. Under this blueprint, ASEAN envisioned to become an economic community by 2025 that is a highly integrated and cohesive economies, competitive, innovative, and dynamic. better connected, and with enhanced sectoral cooperations, resilient, inclusive, people-oriented, and people-centered, and global. The AIR 2019 provides a comprehensive assessment of progress and achievement in ASEAN economic integration toward these goals. The report covers both implementation of AEC commitments as embodied in the blueprint and various sectoral work plans, as well as the outcomes of ASEAN economic integrations as measured by key performance indicators. Ladies and gentlemen, the timing of release of the report is opportune as the region approaches the midterm mark of the 2025 blueprint implementations, and more importantly, at a time where the global context of the region integration is significantly changing. Marked by uncertainties that arise from growing protectionism and the weakening of multilateralism, the region is at risk of a moderating growth outlook. The report argues for continued resolve to deepen regional integrations while keeping markets open, taking into consideration the changing context and emerging issues faced by the regions. As global growth outlook comes under pressure, ASEAN economic performance has so far remained robust. The region has become one of the few bright spots in the global economy, growing on average by 5.4% every year since 2010. In 2018, ASEAN collectively grew by 5.2%, about the global growth of 3.6%. With a combined GDP of $3 trillion, the region retains its position as the world's fifth largest economy. The region economic integration has demonstrated economic significance. Intra-ASEAN market is now both the region's largest trading partners and source of investment at 23% and 15.9% respectively. The regional markets therefore provides a meaningful buffer to external shock and should be further bolstered. Having illustrated the macroeconomic context, the report elaborates on the progress made in the implementation of AEC initiative and measure, and where possible, how this fare against measurable targets. Notwithstanding the significant progress made, the report acknowledges that the AEC goals and the full AEC 2025 visions are work in progress. While milestones have been achieved, a few key initiatives still require further work for the full operationalizations. A deeper understanding of this implementation challenges will help facilitate the achievement of AEC 2025 vision. The report also includes a thematic chapters on the fourth industrial revolution, recognizing a host of new opportunities as well as challenges that this phenomenon will pose to the regions. It informs readers of the steps ASEAN is taking to bolster its readiness for the 4IR. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to convey what I think are the three key takeaways from the report. First, ASEAN economic integration journey doesn't stop, and in fact has only just started with the establishment of the AEC in 2015. The region will continue to deepen cooperation across economic areas and sectors, including by strengthening the region trade and investment linkages, as well as regulatory cooperations. It will do so while keeping in the spirit of open regionalisms. Second, the AEC will need to take into consideration the new dynamics and changing contexts that affect ASEAN economic integration toward 2025. The report has touched on the fourth industrial revolution in detail, but there are many more mega trends that we need to consider, from sustainability concerns to the increasingly transcendental nature of non-traditional security concerns. Third, the AEC is but one of the three pillars of the ASEAN communities. Many of the challenges are cross-cutting in nature, requiring coherent, comprehensive, community-wide response. ASEAN must therefore be agile, ready to evolve, and reinvent itself to remain relevant and effective, and most importantly, to continue to deliver benefit for its people. There has never been a more exciting time than now for ASEAN. Amidst the changing global environment, the region has become a recognizable middle power. Its strength also lies in its convening powers and capacities to serve as a neutral, trusted voice and aspiration to be the centers of the new regional architectures. This is evidenced in the leadership roles the region plays in recent adoption of the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific and the conclusion of text-based negotiation for the regional comprehensive economic partnerships. The challenge for the region is to maintain this positive momentum. To this end, the ASEAN community's midterm review, which would be a priority of next year's chairmanship, under Vietnam, and which would be conducted across the 3 community pillars, provides an opportune time for all stakeholders to assess and evaluate on ASEAN integration progress and trajectory. I believe that this report provides a strong prelude to the review exercises. Ladies and gentlemen, as ASEAN advances its integration efforts, it can do more to ensure that the benefit of the AEC is felt by our people. We are therefore committed to continue enhancing our outreach and stakeholders' engagement efforts in parallel. The AIO is part of this effort. I thank the European Union Arise Plus project, not just for its support to the report, but also the broader work of AEC monitoring and ASEAN statistics. The ASEAN Secretariat will continue to publish the AIO periodically as our contribution to a more informed policy discourse among ASEAN stakeholders. I hope you will find the report and discussion this morning useful. Once again, I thank you for your active participation today.
Thank you, DSG. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, now we would like to invite His Excellency Igor Drisman, EU Ambassador to ASEAN, to deliver his remark. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Deputy Secretary General, Ambassadors, dear colleagues from the Committee of Permanent Representatives, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today for the launch of the ASEAN Integration Report 2019. A report which contains, as the Deputy Secretary General was saying, a lot of bright spots and a lot of good news. And I commend the progress that was recorded in the report over the past 4 years on the ambitious ASEAN Economic Community Blueprint 2025. Allow me to praise as well the clear-eyed way forward that was defined in the report and the many recommendations that were made. Let me underline the need, for example, to translate regional commitments into national level commitments, milestones and targets. This will require incorporating ASEAN's economic integration agenda into national policy-making processes, having an effective engagement and sharing information both at national and regional levels, sometimes across sectors. It's a challenging task ahead for which you have all my sympathy as EU regional organization. It's a challenge we know all too well. The ASEAN Economic Community is an important pillar in our EU-ASEAN partnership, not only in terms of our growing trade and investment ties, but also through our development cooperation. Actually, half of our financial contribution supports the economic and trade connectivity of ASEAN and the implementation of the AEC Blueprint 2025, representing an amount close to €100 million over the current financial cycle, which is 7 years. Our main program in this venture is called Arise Plus and was mentioned by the Deputy SecGen before. The program was designed along the chapters of the AEC Blueprint 2025, and today, as we review the integration process, I'm glad to acknowledge the positive contribution that Arise Plus has made to the AEC implementation. And let me take maybe 3 concrete examples of that partnership and those contributions that were made that illustrate, we think, well, the progress made. The first one is the ASEAN Trade Repository. The second one, Assist, the ASEAN Solution for Services, Investments and Trade. And the third one, the ASEAN Custom Transit System. And maybe let me have a word on each of those 3. First, the ASEAN Trade Repository. The repository enhances the transparency of trade and customs procedures in ASEAN. Did you know, for example, that the public can access 24/7 the information available on the national trade repository of each ASEAN member states? I didn't know that until yesterday. So, I encourage the private sector, represented also here today, to visit the dedicated website, which is, as I said, a very important one. The harmonized standards adopted by ASEAN can also be accessed on the ATR. And for the fruit producers, exporters or traders, already 1,700 sanitary or phytosanitary non-tariff measures have been uploaded. Of course, it's still work in progress. We shall soon have uploaded 40% of the non-tariff measures on the ATR. The coordination with ASEAN member states will be important to finalize this tedious exercise for the sake of transparency and give access to this information to the private sectors. I count on the ASEAN member states here present to make this undertaking a priority. Second, ASSIST. ASSIST is the ASEAN Solutions for Services, Investment and Trade, and designed for the ASEAN private sector. It will help you link with government authorities in the region when you encounter cross-border trading problems. ASSIST will help you to find a solution in 60 days. Confidentiality and anonymity are guaranteed. Again, a dedicated website is only one click away. Third, the ASEAN Customs Transit System, which was designed for the faster movement of goods by road within ASEAN. The ACTS will be the first ever computerized custom transit management system in ASEAN. The first deployment is for Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar and Vietnam. Thanks to the ACTS, the ASEAN private sector, ASEAN regional economic integration and enhance its connectivity. A launch we foresee for April 2020. I also note some other important developments reported in the report 2019. They've been achieved thanks to our long-standing partnership, notably in the promotion and protection of intellectual property, good regulatory practices, notably in food safety, transport and customs facilitation, or on civil aviation. Let me underline the importance of the structured engagement of the private sector. This was a new feature of the AEC Blueprint 2025, and the report shows advances also on this account, an engagement that we have supported. Nevertheless, there is always room for improvement also here. For example, the need to strengthen the consultation mechanism between ASEAN and the private sector. It's also important to improve the socialization of ASEAN initiatives and make them more accessible to the ASEAN business community. It will reinforce the economic integration for a people-oriented, people-centered ASEAN. To finish, I would like to focus on what is mentioned as Global ASEAN, the fifth strategic area of the blueprint, and underline our special relation. The EU and ASEAN's economic partnership has matured as our inter-regional trade and investment has identified. The EU has become ASEAN's second largest trading partner, and ASEAN is the EU's third largest trade partner outside Europe. Bilateral merchandise trade has almost doubled over the last decade. More impressive still, over the years, the EU remained the largest investor in ASEAN, and ASEAN investment in Europe had also been growing rapidly. It's with this market potential in mind that the EU launched a series of free trade agreement negotiations with ASEAN countries. I'm very pleased that last week the EU-Singapore FTA entered into force. The EU-Vietnam FTA was signed and is now awaiting ratification by Parliament. Negotiations with Indonesia are ongoing, and with Thailand we will resume very soon. We hope that these bilateral FTAs serve as a building block, or as building blocks, towards a future EU-ASEAN region-to-region FTA and an even stronger economic partnership. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Drisman. Now, as a token of memory of today's special occasion, we will have a photo session. May we kindly invite DSG Kong Phuc to the stage, together with Ambassador Iguodala. and our distinguished speakers and moderators, Dr. Juliet Jaja, Ibu Dr. Donna Gultom, Dr. Duan T. Tanha, Dr. Gloria Pasadilla, Mr. Ananga Rusdiono, and also our moderator, Dr. Alexander Chandra, to come to the stage. Okay. Now I would like to request Excellency to remain on the stage, and may we kindly invite the members of the Committee of Permanent Representative to join Excellencies to the stage for the second photo op. Okay, thank you so much. Excellencies, you may return to your seat. As we have mentioned earlier, that this event is live streaming via YouTube, and also live streaming via Facebook page of the ASEAN Secretariat, so everybody could also participate in this discussion. Now, since today is a very special event for all of us, we will also have one special photo arrangement. Not only we have a photo session for the honorable guests, but we would like to take a picture with all of the participants in this room. So our photographer will come up to the stage and take a group picture of all of the speakers and participants. We would like to kindly invite all the guests to stand up for the photo session, please. Okay. Okay, give your best smile. 1, 2, 3. One more, say ASEAN, Give your best smile, and 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you very much. Wow, okay. Oh, I see someone familiar there. Okay, now we will begin our discussion session. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would like to kindly invite our speakers, Dr. Julia Tijaja, and our discussants, Iguodala Gultam, Dr. Don T. Tanha, Dr. Gloria Pasadilia, and Mr. Ananga Rusdiono, as well as our moderator, Dr. Alexander Chandra, to come to the stage for our discussion session. Dr. Julia and Iguodala, and Dr. Don T. Tanha, Dr. Gloria Pasadilia, and Mr. Ananga Rusdiono. Okay, this very important discussion will be moderated by Dr. Alexander Chandra, the Assistant Director of Analysis and Monitoring on Trade, Industries and Emerging Issues Division of the ASEAN Integration Monitoring Directorate. Thank you. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you, FIFA. Very good morning to you all, Excellencies, DSG Kumfok, Ambassador Igor Drismans, member of the Committee of the Permanent Representative, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. A very good morning. Welcome to the ASEAN Secretariat and welcome to the launch of the ASEAN Integration Report 2019. We are pleased to be able to have this important publication launched today, although it has already been initially released in time for the ASEAN Summit, 35th ASEAN Summit earlier this month. As indicated earlier by DSG Kumfok, the ASEAN Integration Report is the flagship publication of the ASEAN Integration Monitoring Directorate of the ASEAN Secretariat. It is the second of such publication, the first of which was published in 2015. The launch event that we are attending today is actually provide us the opportunity for us, the ASEAN Secretariat, to socialize the highlight and recommendation of the report and also allow the public to provide inputs on the way significant over the last 4 years. I think overall we have been, the progress can be seen in the 5 characteristics of the AEC Blueprint 2025 in terms of our effort to create a highly integrated and cohesive economy, competitive and innovative dynamic ASEAN. There's also been quite significant progress in terms of our efforts to enhance connectivity and improve sectoral cooperation. And more importantly, of course, our initiative to create a resilient, inclusive, people-oriented and people-centered ASEAN. And last but not least, our effort in enhancing our partnership with the global economy. So, of course, I'm not going into detail with all of this. We have a very distinguished speaker, Dr. Julia Tijaja, the Director of the ASEAN Integration Monitoring Directorate, who will be providing quite detailed some highlights of the key points from the ASEAN integration ahead. Now, the achievement of ASEAN that I mentioned earlier, of course, quite significant, especially if we think about some of the key challenges that we are facing today. First and foremost, of course, the trade war that has been happening among the major economies around the world, and also a growing protectionism that is undermining the multilateral trading system. Last but not least is also issues such as disruptive technology that is challenging, that is brought about by the fourth industrial revolution. So the challenge ahead for us, I guess, is how we can navigate all these challenges together, and at the same time also able to actually proceed with our economic integration in line what has been envisioned in the AEC Blueprint 2025. So without further ado, let me just invite Dr. Julia Tijaya to provide the presentation on the key highlights of the report. Dr. Tijaya, please.
Thank you very much, Alex, and good morning, Excellencies, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, colleagues from the ASEAN Secretariat as well. So it's my pleasure to be here today, and I basically have quite a bit of a challenge. Basically, I have to present it in 30 minutes, highlight of this 173 pages report, and I do hope that this will be worth your half-hour investment as well, just by at least getting a quick summary of what the report is about. I will try not to repeat any of the points that has been raised by the distinguished earlier speakers as well. So, but basically, this is a report that the ASEAN Integration Monitoring Directorate produced on a periodic basis. It's quite a comprehensive report, so it's not an annual report. As DSG has mentioned earlier, we first actually published this in 2015 because at that time we thought if we want to establish the ASEAN Economic Community, it is important for the stakeholders to know what the AEC actually comprise of. The timing of this second issue of the report, we thought is very timely for two very key reasons. First, ASEAN is approaching the midterm mark of the implementation of the AEC Blueprint. We will be conducting our midterm review next year. And also secondly, which is also equally as important, because we think that the world that we are in today has significantly changed from the world that it was in 2015 when we first launched the AEC Blueprint. Next slide, please. Okay, so for this report, it comprised of 4 main sections, if you like. After introduction, there was actually an overview of the macroeconomic landscape that, of ASEAN. It's followed by the core part of the report that provides a comprehensive assessment of the progress and achievement that we had in the ASEAN economic integration for the past 4 years. It then followed with a shorter thematic chapter on the ASEAN in the fourth industrial revolution, and closes with the recommendations and way forward. So we'll start with the macroeconomic environment. Next slide, please. Next slide. Right, this is just a very simple chart. It just shows you the trend in the GDP growth rate for ASEAN and for the world as well. And then as you can actually see very quickly there, the blue line is ASEAN. So for the past 8 years or so, ASEAN has consistently been outperforming global growth performance, which is the orange one in the middle. And in fact, for more years than not, ASEAN has also been performing better than emerging market and developing economies. That's the yellow one on the screen. On average, the region has been growing by 5.4% annually between 2010 to 2018. Some of our member states, particularly Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam, but also the Philippines, has in fact been growing by even more than 6% on the annual basis as well. Next slide, please. Okay, there's lots of numbers there, but in short, this table is trying to give you a sense of where ASEAN stands globally in terms of output, in terms of trade, and in terms of investment. In terms of output, ASEAN has been able to hit the $3 trillion mark in terms for our nominal GDP last year. This placed us as the 5th largest economy in the world, and we actually accounted for 3.5% of global nominal GDP, an increase from just 2.9% in 2010. And if you look at that from the PPP, the purchasing power parity perspective, the share is even higher. We accounted for 6.5% of global GDP in PPP terms, an increase from just 5.5% in 2010. In terms of trade, we are now a global trade powerhouse. We are the 4th largest traders in the world, both in terms of trade in goods and trade in services. We accounted about 7.2% of global trade in goods, 6.8% of global trade in services. We basically come behind EU, China, and the US. And on investment, we are now the third largest recipient of FDI flows in 2018, accounting for almost 1/8 of global investment flows, coming third after just EU and the US as well. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. Okay, so this slide, just very briefly, it shows you the share of intra-ASEAN trade and FDI, because I know that some of you will definitely raise this, some of the readers. So as you can see, the red one shows you the intra-ASEAN share for trade in goods, and you do see that it has been at least slightly moderating for the past 8 years. The same thing with the green one, which is basically intra-ASEAN share for trade in services. Likewise, it's been slightly moderating, but the yellow one actually shows intra-ASEAN trade of FDI inflows, where there has been, it's fluctuative because it's measured in terms of flows, but there has been a general upward trend. So this is an area that ASEAN really wants to be working on, which is to strengthen ASEAN intra-regional trade and investment, because we felt that this provides us with a lot more opportunity to basically deepen economic integration, but also promote economic growth and development. Next slide, please. Now, this is the core part of the report. I will try not to go into too much detail, but at the same time try to cover all the 5 characteristics of the ASEAN Economic Community 2025. We'll start with the first characteristic, which is a highly integrated and cohesive economy, and you have to start with tariff, as usual. So for trade in goods, what the chart actually shows you is the percentage of tariff line with 0% in our ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement tariff schedule. And you can actually see that for ASEAN, intra-ASEAN tariff has actually been virtually eliminated, with 98.6% of the tariff lines basically is at 0 tariff now. Of course, the rate is a bit higher for ASEAN 6 at 99.3%. Just slightly lower now at 97.7% for the CLMV. Next slide, please. But we all know the message that we've been hearing very clearly, that the trade is not just facilitated by just removing tariffs, opening your market. It is also equally important to address non-tariff measures as well. So I think there has been a lot of studies out there highlighting that there has been an increase in the number of non-tariff measures in ASEAN and so on. We have 2 messages here. Basically, one, ASEAN is looking into addressing the barriers effect of the non-tariff measures. We have adopted the NTM guidelines, and we are looking into its implementation now, including through the establishment of the National Trade Facilitation Committee in the different ASEAN member states. Secondly, we thought that it's important also to highlight the message that it is easy to get fixated at the numbers, but it is also, I think, important to look at this in the bigger context as well. The barriers effect of NTM has to be eliminated, but NTM in themselves are not always bad. Some of them has to be in place for the purpose of public safety and so on. And I think we just add comparison with other partners as well there, that in a number of cases, you actually find that some of the more developed markets actually have a huge number of NTMs because they have a more developed regulatory framework. Or sometimes your NTM actually increased because there has been an increase in the efficiency in terms of notification of the NTM as well. So it's not an excuse, it's something that we are going to work towards, but I think it's also a reminder not to get fixated on the numbers themselves, because there's a lot of dimension even to NTMs as well. Next slide, please. These are all the other areas that we are working on trade in goods, so there is a lot there, but I'm glad that I think Ambassador Igor, your presentation just now actually helped me shorten my presentation because you highlighted some of the key initiatives there. But in short, on the rules of origin, our goal is to keep rules of origin to be simple, business-friendly, and trade facilitating. We have the ASEAN-wide self-certification scheme that we hope to be fully operationalized by March 2020. We have put in kind of a workout ongoing to finalize the legal framework needed to run the scheme. And on trade facilitation, there has been a number of fundamentals that has been put in place: ASEAN Trade Facilitation Framework, the Joint Consultative Committee with participation from the public sector, as well as a strategic action plan on trade facilitation. Now I'm just going to go through quickly 2 of the key initiatives, because I think Ambassador Igor just now has mentioned the other 3. So sometimes the simplest application of initiative is actually the one that can be more practical, most practical for use of business. So we have this thing that's called the ASEAN Tariff Finder, which is basically an online no-cost facility for businesses to go and find out about tariff information under all different ASEAN Plus FTAs. We also have the ASEAN Single Window, a key initiative that we know many of the private sector has been waiting for, and there has been the new momentum in the efforts to have this fully operationalized very soon. So at the moment, 7 of the ASEAN member states already on the live operation of the ASEAN Single Window for the exchange of the e-Artiga Form D, and the remaining 3 are at the final stage, and we hope to see all of them coming on board by the end of this year. On customs, the customs transit system has been discussed by our Igor just now. The other thing that we are working on is on the authorized economic operators and its MRA. So we have 6 AMS ASEAN member states now. They already have their national authorized economic operators initiative, and there is now ongoing discussions on the regional MRA. We have completed the feasibility study. A sub-working group has been established to basically pursue this on the Pathfinder basis next year. On standard conformance, again, this is actually a very critical work, especially as ASEAN is looking towards enhancing participation in GVC. We already have harmonized regulatory regime for electronics, cosmetics, and medical devices. There's ongoing negotiations for traditional medicine and health supplement as well. We do have a number of sectoral mutual recognition arrangement in place, and we are also looking at continued application of good regulatory practice in standard and conformance. Next slide, please. This is the slide that we have on services. I think there's one message to take from this slide is that services sector is just going to become more important, not less important in the years to come. Already, it is contributing more than half of ASEAN GDP in 2018 and attracting more than 60% of FDIs into the region. So it's a very critical. And trade in services in ASEAN, though it started as a much lower basis, it actually been growing much faster than trade in goods at about 17.4% annually since 2010, while for trade in goods it's been growing at 4.4%. Services agenda in ASEAN so far has been pursued under the ASEAN Framework Agreement on Services, where ASEAN is working on the gradual removal of restrictions across an increasing number of subsectors. The 10 FS package, the final package has actually been signed in 2018, and the last few ASEAN member states is finalizing their 10 ASEAN package of commitments. But ASEAN is also going to, again, like in goods, we are going to go beyond just opening of markets. We now are deepening our service integration through the ASEAN Trade in Services Agreement. And basically under the ATISA, we will build on the achievement under AFAS, and we also going to look deeper into regulatory cooperation as well, including in the domestic regulations. The ATISA also have annexes on financial services, telecommunication services, and air transport services. Last but not least, an important part of our work related to services is on the mobility of skills and professional. We now have 8 mutual recognition arrangement for 8 professional services. It works differently, the details are in the report. We have an ASEAN agreement on the movement of natural person that has entered into force since 2016. And we also have the ASEAN Qualification Reference Framework that allow for comparison of education qualification across ASEAN member states. Next slide, please. On investment, I'm just going to show you 2 graphs, and this basically show the gold-colored chart bar. That's actually the intra-ASEAN share. So you can actually see that it's not just in trade that the intra-ASEAN market has become the largest market, but also in investment, intra-ASEAN actually has become the most important source of investment as well, followed by the EU, and as you see on screen as well. And there's a number of other countries that has become more prominent as our sources of investment. In short, I think our FDI inflows has been growing at an average of 4.6% annually. Intra-ASEAN trade has been growing faster at about 5.2%. Next slide, please. So this is just the kind of the scope where we are working on our investment work. So we have the 4-prong approach covering liberalization, protection, facilitation, and promotion. A key part of our work is what we call the peer review process, where ASEAN member states will actually update each other using an agreed templates on any changes in their investment regime. So that kind of helped to open up to transparency, but also the sharing of any best practices in ASEAN member states as well. Another important feature of our investment work, there's been a growing interest as well on the emerging issues related to investment. So that's things on sustainable investment, also on the responsible business conduct. So these are the kind of things also gaining traction in conversation in ASEAN work in investment. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a very informative table, but essentially financial integration is a very key part of our work if we want to integrate our market. Under the new blueprint, we are looking at financial integration also from the perspective of financial inclusion and financial stability. As I already mentioned earlier, for liberalization, it has been pursued under the ASEAN Framework Agreement and Services, and we do have an annex to carry this forward to the ASEAN Trade in Services Agreement as well. We also have work on banking integration, focusing on the network of qualified ASEAN banks, where we focus on basically providing greater market access and operational flexibility to qualified ASEAN banks in the respective ASEAN member states. On capital account liberalization and capital market development, there are work ongoing on the promotion of local currency usage for trade and investment. There is also a growing momentum on the work on sustainability, sustainable financing standards. So we now have 3 standards in place: green bond standards, social bond standards, and sustainability bond standards. Payment and settlement system, that's also another very key area of work. ASEAN is in the process of developing the ASEAN payment policy framework and also promoting the adoption of international standards when it comes to payment systems. Financial inclusion, a very key part of our work as well. We do have a financial inclusion framework in 2016. ASEAN has also adopted guidance notes for ASEAN Financial Inclusion National Strategy and Digital Financial Services, and ASEAN has also launched the Financial Education Portal as well. So the financial inclusion is a very key area of our work, not just under the finance track, but also under the micro and small medium enterprise track as well. Infrastructure financing is an area that we are looking at as well, and I think new financing initiatives has actually been launched just this year under the Thailand's chairmanship. Last but not least, on taxation, we are focusing on the avoidance of double taxations agreement. There are about 68 now in place, and ASEAN member states are also participating in various the forum for for greater transparency for exchange of information related to tax. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm not going to go into the technicalities of this, but we have an assessment of ASEAN for global value chain participation, looking at both the forward and the backward linkages. Forward linkages means how much does actually ASEAN values goes into the export that goes into the global value chains. Backward linkages means how much of the foreign intermediates are being used in the ASEAN exports as well. And in the report, you actually see different assessment being done for different sectors, including primary, low-tech, medium and high-tech products, and even on services as well. Next slide, please. So very quickly on the second characteristic, I put together competition, consumer protection, intellectual property, because all these things are very key for an enabling business environment. And basically we draw out some common strands of the work that we are undertaking. Ensuring effective laws and regulations in place is a key part of our work, and at the moment I think we have 9 ASEAN member states already have competition and consumer protection laws in place, and the remaining AMS at the very final stage of enacting these laws. There is also a lot of focus on transparency, be that from the publication of compendiums of laws and regulations in ASEAN, the availability of online platform to provide more information about IP and other works in these areas in ASEAN. Capacity building is another area that we are focusing on as well, be that in terms of actual capacity building initiatives or the virtual one in terms of research or also training platform. Moving forward, we'll be focusing a lot also on convergence and alignment. There is a number of documents, guidelines, guiding principles that has been adopted that basically help ASEAN to better align and converge in these areas of work moving forward. Last but not least, even in these, if you like, conventional areas of regulations, there is a need to take into consideration the changing dynamics, digitalization of economy and businesses, and the fourth industrial revolution. So these are the kind of thing that we need to keep our work in these areas modern and relevant. Next slide, please. Now, good regulatory practice is a new area of work in the AEC blueprint. Also, I think in the standards and conformance, they started even earlier. But in short, we have actually adopted the ASEAN GRP core principles, and we are looking into ways to mainstream these principles to the different areas of work. And it has been done in a number of sectors. The ASEAN NTM guidelines, for example, draw references from these GRP core principles in developing how they would like to implement the guidelines. And similarly, I think most recently, the standard and conformance track has also been making use of these core principles to update their good regulatory practice guide in the context of standard and conformance. And we want to see this further replicated across the areas of ASEAN work. Next slide, please. So an enhanced connectivity and sectoral cooperation, because there's a lot of sectors here, I mean, if I may summarize. So on the first slide, basically what we highlight are those sectors where has fundamental horizontal significance across all other areas. These are basically the fundamentals that you need to keep ASEAN as a region connected, not only physically, but also in the digital sense as well. So we have cooperation in the areas of transport, that focus on air, land, maritime, sustainable transport, and also transport facilitation. We also have our work in the area of ICT. There's a growing significance of the work related to data these days, and most recently, actually, the telecommunications minister and officials have even renamed themselves as the ASEAN digital ministers and officials, just to give that, I think, further prominence on the digital aspect of their work. On e-commerce, again, work has really picked up under this blueprint. We already established a coordinating committee to deal with e-commerce in 2017. The ASEAN Agreement on E-commerce has been signed by all ASEAN member states in early 2019. And the coordinating committee has actually also endorsed the ASEAN digital framework last year, followed by an action plan that has already been finalized in 2019. On energy, I think we have the ASEAN gas pipeline work, and also promoting more multilateral electricity trade to the ASEAN power grid. But there is also ongoing work in improving energy efficiency and conservation as well. Last but not least is science and technologies. This is very important. In the new blueprint, we specifically emphasize the importance of innovation. There is a number of initiatives going on, but most recently, I think we have a strong political impetus with the issuance of the Declaration on Innovation, and followed by the Innovation Roadmap, which is currently being finalized by our Science, Technology and Innovation track. Next slide, please. I think we can skip this slide. This is just some statistics. Next slide, please. And so this slide just focuses on 3 strategic sectors. They are also part of the blueprints. But again, I think if you look at some of the common strands from these 3 sectors, there's a lot of focus on standards, the development of standards specific to these sectors. There's a lot of focus on improving competitiveness of this particular sector in ASEAN. For example, improving the participation of smallholder farmers in the global value chain, or ASEAN as an attractive single tourism destination. There is also a growing emphasis on sustainability in the work across these 3 sectors, as well as, so sustainability is key, and the use of technologies to increase productivity and competitiveness in these sectors as well. On minerals, there's a greater focus now on focusing on the sustainable mineral development. Next slide, please. Okay, this is on, we're already on the 4th characteristic, which is on resilient, inclusive, people-centered, and people-oriented. So this slide focuses on the MSMEs and our private sector engagement. So on MSMEs, there is the focus of our work is basically on policy and regulations best practices. We have done some work on starting a business and registration, business registration practices, because it is important for us to basically promote the formalization of MSMEs so that they can take full advantage of the facilities and protection that are available for them in the formal economy. Access to finance, I already mentioned, is a key area of work under MSME as well. increasingly becoming important as well, the notion of internationalization and digitalization on MSMEs. The digitalization of the economy is really, it can be a two-edged sword. On the one hand, it provides new opportunities for smaller businesses to take part in the global market, but at the same time, if the digital divide is not being addressed, the MSMEs are likely to be the one that's falling behind. So these are the kind of thing that we need to be looking into as well. And last but not least, inclusive business. And this is the notion that ASEAN economic integration is not just for big businesses, but it has to be inclusive. So we need to have firms of different sizes to be able to benefit from the AEC as well. On the private sector engagement, I think Ambassador Igor already specifically mentioned that we are really intensifying work in this area. Even within the ASEAN Secretariat itself, we already have a dedicated division, the Enterprise and Stakeholder Engagement Division, set up to focus their work on this. And we actually see an increase, an improvement in the numbers and the structure of engagement with the private sector. I think in the past 3 years alone, there is almost a 50% increase in the number of engagement, but what's equally important is to make sure that the quality of engagement also improves. To this end, we have actually revised the rules of procedures for private sector engagement in 2017. And as part of the initiative for the ASEAN Secretariat, we have also come out what we call this AEC dialogue. We have actually held 3 of these in the past 2 years alone, where we invited representatives from ASEAN BAC, but also different Joint Business Council. They came here. We have like general discussions on topics of relevance to the AEC, and there is also more specialized discussion clinics as well on topics as of interest to them. That allows businesses to get a accurate update on the work that we have in ASEAN so that they can better cater their recommendations in the way that it will be most effective feedback to the ASEAN integration work. Next. On the narrowing of development gap, so there's ongoing effort to implement the initiative for ASEAN Integration Work Plan 3. That is focused on the 5 strategic areas on food and agriculture, trade facilitation, MSMEs, education, and health and well-being. So this is basically another layer of support that some ASEAN member states are receiving in order to meet their regional commitments under the blueprint, but also across the 3 community pillars as well. The chart on the left shows that there has been a greater increase in the GDP per capita for the CLM fees as well. And I think the chart there actually shows that for the past 18 years, actually, some of our least developed member states are actually the ones that have the higher growth rate as well. And this is something that we want to see. You know, they start maybe at the lower base, but we hope that there is some catching up and we can to narrow the development gap. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just on global ASEAN, so I'm not going to go into the details, but basically ASEAN now have 6 FTAs with China, Korea, Japan, India, Australia, New Zealand, and most recently the one with Hong Kong that just entered into force earlier this year. And one message that I want to share is that these FTAs, they are not static. So they are a continuous upgrading and review efforts to keep these FTAs effective and relevant. For example, for the FTA with China, which is the oldest one, there has been an upgrading protocol in place. We have actually finalized the revision of the rules of origin, and there are now discussions underway to look into other areas as well. With the ASEAN Japan, just earlier this year, we have signed the protocol to amend the ASEAN-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership. They will allow the incorporation of trade in services, investment, and movement of natural person as well into the agreement. Next slide. And on the ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand FTA, we are now in the process of undertaking the general review. The first stage has actually been completed. There is actually a report available online. And the ministers earlier this year has endorsed the work plan for the upgrade negotiation. So now we are working towards finalizing the second protocol to amend the ANSPATA. Last slide. RCEP, we can discuss about this later, but in short, negotiations between 10 ASEAN member states and the 6 FTA partners. It has been ongoing for 7 long years, since 2012. And basically, after 28 rounds of negotiation, we had the 3rd RCEP summit just in the 4th of November just earlier this month actually, where leaders announced the conclusion of text-based negotiation for all 20 chapters of the RCEP and essentially all market access issues among the 15 RPCs, RCEP participating countries. So now legal scrubbing has been tasked to commence so that we can prepare for the signing of the agreement in 2020. And the list, again, the list of the RCEP chapters are actually available in the joint leaders statement as well. Next, please. So this is almost the last part. This is the penultimate part of my presentation. Next. But basically on the fourth industrial revolution, the details are in the report, but what we want to highlight is that there has been, the fourth industrial revolution has been high on the ASEAN agenda for the past 2 or 3 years. It was first given leaders recognition in the 2017 that ASEAN leaders actually recognized that ASEAN need appropriate policy responses to deal with the fourth industrial revolution. Following from that, a comprehensive assessment on ASEAN readiness was actually commissioned by the ASEAN, undertaken by the ASEAN Secretariat. And then you also see a number of initiatives coming up related to the 4IR, from the Digital Integration Framework, Framework on Digital Data Governance, ASEAN Agreement of E-Commerce, of course, and so on and so forth. What is important, the key development within this year is you also see an intensification of dialogue on the fourth industrial revolution, not just within the AEC pillar, but also across ASEAN community pillars as well, because you cannot work on the fourth industrial revolution just from the economic perspective alone. The implication is much bigger than that. There is security consideration, there is a labor and education training consideration as well that has to be taken on board. So at least in this year, there's 2 special sessions. When we thank Thailand under their chairmanship, they've been able to organize a special session on the 4IR very early in the year. And then later on, we actually convened a special coordinating committee of the whole meeting for the AEC on the fourth industrial revolution, where we invite representatives from all relevant sectoral bodies across the 3 community pillars. So what are we doing next? Okay, just to add, this year's alone, under Thailand chairmanship, we have 13 priority economic deliverables. 5 of that are actually related to the fourth industrial revolution. That shows the importance that ASEAN plays on the fourth industrial revolution. As part of the next step, ASEAN has now agreed to develop a consolidated strategy on the 4IR, which will be community-wide, not just under the AEC. And ASEAN also recognized the need for a better platform for information sharing, for also a coordination mechanism across the different sectors, not just in the AEC, but also across the 3 community pillars as well. Next slide, please. I think this is my penultimate slide, actually, but this is just show you the main outcome of that very long internal report that we did on the readiness assessment, but it did show that different ASEAN member states are positioned differently in the quadrant. And what we do basically, we make use, but we're but we basically take reference from the from the World Economic Forum Future of Production methodology, but we in discussions with them, but we actually focus on those indicators that are most relevant to the work under the ASEAN community, where data is available for all 10 ASEAN member states, because we want to be able to assess the readiness for all ASEAN member states. And what has been highlighted there is that we have so many regional and national initiatives already introduced or in the pipeline, but sometimes, at least at the regional level, they are taken from a very sectoral perspective, and for their effective implementation, you actually need stronger cross-sectoral or cross-pillar coordinations on these initiatives. At the same time, there's also a need to have a very clear vision of where ASEAN wants to go. So we have heard a number of common themes being repeated, like the need for ASEAN to address the digital divide, for example, the need for ASEAN to embrace technology, not just for the sake of technology, but to actually make use of technology to address some of these social or sustainability development concerns, the need to basically look at the impact of these technologies on the dislocations within the regional economy and things like that. So those are the kind of things that we need to be looking at. Last slide. So we have key way forward here. So one, I think like Ambassador already mentioned now, we need to make sure that all the regional commitments that we have undertaken are translated into national implementation. Sometimes when we talk to the private sector, they actually say that you guys are doing okay, but make sure what you have committed are actually implemented. Sometimes there's probably less need to introduce more and more new initiatives, but make sure that we are really fully operationalizing what we already committed. And to do so, one of the lessons that we learned from conducting country visits and so on, the importance of very strong national level coordination. Because sometimes those people that kind of sit there, the officials attending the ASEAN meetings may not be the same people actually in the implementing agency within their countries. And that kind of coordination and strong national monitoring effort also need to be put in place. Third, when it comes to market integration, it's not enough to just about opening up restrictions, but there's also the need to focus on facilitation as well, transparency and regulatory cooperation, and there's a need to pay more attention for the deepening of financial integration as well. This is important. This is the one that will actually lubricate market activities and help with the market integration as well. Competition, consumer protection, IP, those are key areas of work. There is a need to further strengthen them, their effectiveness, and to make sure that they remain modern in light of global economic realities. Good regulatory practice, we see this to be an area that's going to be gaining importance, and the need to mainstream this across different work areas. On connectivity, again, as already mentioned just now, there's those horizontal sectors that we just need to have in place and running effectively if ASEAN wants to be a connected region. Transport, ICT, energy, and e-commerce, and if I may add, also science and technology, which is very important for to support innovation in the region. But also don't forget those strategic sectors like agriculture, mineral, and tourism, because many of those sectors are the one with the closer local linkages as well, providing key economic development and employment in parts of our society. We are also highlighting here the importance to improve cross-sectoral and cross-pillar coordination. Increasingly, we cannot work on a siloed sector-by-sector basis. If you want to talk about sustainable transport, it cannot be looked from the transport perspective alone. You got to work with energy, for example. Likewise, for energy security, the energy people will have to work with environment. For IR, if it's about the digital skills and so on, it's not just about the economic perspective, but we have to talk to the labor and education people and many other examples. Stakeholder engagement is an area that we definitely have to strengthen. There has been momentum in terms of institutionalization and effective feedback, but I think we shouldn't forget the broader stakeholders as well, and we would like to intensify engagement and conversations with them. 8, I think we need to note that ASEAN has been growing in global importance. It's not something that we should avoid. So there is a need for ASEAN to basically further strengthen the current ASEAN and future ASEAN-led and centered mechanisms, and for ASEAN to play a more proactive role in the global platform. And last but not least, as I said earlier on in my presentation, the world is changing. There will be a lot of emerging trends and issues that we have not foreseen or were not that prominent in 2015 when we developed the 2025 blueprint. And ASEAN needs to be ready, to be agile and innovative enough to be able to provide prompt policy responses to those areas. I think with that I end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for sharing with us the progress highlights and key recommendations. It was quite a challenge for us to prepare the presentation. Quite long, how to make it very concise, but I think you delivered it quite well. When I started, I was a bit excited in terms of socializing the outcome of this report. I didn't actually properly introduce my colleague Julia here. Just a very brief introduction, I promise. Julia has been the director for AIMD since 2015. And of course, one of the small area of her work has been, as a director, has been analysis of issues relevant to and the monitoring of surveillance and implementation of the ASEAN Economic Community as well as the ASEAN statistic. Before joining ASEAN Secretariat, she was a research analyst at the Fang Global Institute in Hong Kong, and also trade policy advisor and caretaker chief trade advisor at the Office of the Chief Trade Advisor for the Pacific Island countries in Vanuatu, as well as the trade policy analyst for the government of Solomon Island, based in Solomon Islands. So that's it. Now what we are going to do is I'm going to invite the commentators, the discussions to provide some insights of what they think about what Julia has been highlighting. Hopefully all good. We actually gave them a big homework. We sent them the report far in advance to enable them to read. So I trust that you have all read the report. So the first chance I will pass it to Iguodala. So Iguodala is the, let me just introduce her a bit. So she's the Director for ASEAN Negotiation from the Directorate General for International Trade Negotiation of the Ministry of Trade of Republic Indonesia. This is a position that she has held since 2016. She was also the alternate lead for Indonesia for the Trade Negotiating Committee on the RCEP. And also prior to leading the directorate, her present job, she was also the director for ASEAN Cooperation, as well as Strat Attaché in Indonesia of Indonesia in Canberra. I think at some point she was also spending quite a long time in the Ministry of Agriculture. So she's very well experienced on ASEAN and ASEAN affairs, also sitting in SEOM and so on. So she's well positioned to share with us, to give us some good inputs as to how she thinks about our ASEAN economic integration has been proceeding. So Bu, you have 7 minutes to give 7 minutes to share your good views about the process of the progress of ASEAN economic integration. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. First of all, I just would like to congratulate the ASEAN Secretariat, especially Julia and her teams. I think for the huge work that you have done, ASEAN, I think, should thank ASEAN Secretariat for this job, and thank you for being able to comprehensively convey the message of what ASEAN is doing so far in our economic integration. So when I read actually the executive summary, only some of the detailed report that I've gone through, I thought, wow, ASEAN has so many initiatives. So because, as you may aware, that Julia's presentation is from trade in goods until the whole pillars of ASEAN Economic Community Blueprint 2025. In our first phase of integration economic, we kind of having quite simple kind of initiatives, not really simple, but not as much as that we have during this AAC Blueprint 2025. So reading these all initiatives, I was so amazed of how ambitious ASEAN is. Although I also realize I also only taking care of the issues under purview of some senior economic officials. So, but looking at the whole initiatives, I was so amazed. And I think what I understand from ASEAN, we have so many initiatives, and we are in the process of implementing all the initiatives. I think 10 ASEAN member states, as to your understanding, we are consisting of different level of economic development. So in implementing the whole initiatives, we have to work together and understanding each other situation. So if you see how the Julia put the conclusion here, so we need to translate regional commitments into national commitments. This is exactly what the challenges is. When we negotiated one agreement, for example, and we struggle to have this completed, and again to have this signed, also challenges, and ratifying, implementing. So I think the way I see ASEAN is moving slowly but sure. With all these initiatives, we have all commitments to really implement what we have agreed upon, that we would like to see our regions to move forward. And because we do believe that by having these all commitments, we believe that it will help us to grow. It's ASEAN member states. So if you see in 2015, I would say this is the first milestone for ASEAN integration in economic pillar. And we struggle as well. We, at that first time, we are so ambitious, and we realize that we have to somehow manage the ambition, and we continue our integration. So if you see, from the perspective of tariff rates, we don't have any issues anymore. But then, why is, if you see how the performance of this intra-trade of ASEAN is not really growing much during the whole 10 years of implementation. So like I said to you, we struggle as well while we try to move its member states. So you see the development is slowly move up, and we know that by having this blueprint 2025, somehow ASEAN will deepen what's quite a number of initiatives that we have already gone through in our first stage of integration, and we deepen this. Like for example, if you have heard Julia saying that we are now implementing the anti-AMS guidelines, because you see a number of anti-AMS there of ASEAN member states. It doesn't mean actually anti-AMS, nothing wrong with anti-AMS, but then if you see the intra-trade among ASEAN, I think ASEAN need to work on their own anti-AMS issues. So that's why we have these guidelines for us to really embark on improving the way we put our anti-AMS in all ASEAN member states. So this is one commitment that I think ASEAN will work hard to implement this in the hope that we will see the intra-trade of ASEAN will moving up. That is our intention. I think I see, if you see the data showing the investment actually, previously in 2010, actually investment coming from the EU, the highest, but after 8 years, you see ASEAN is taking care of the investment among us, intra-ASEAN. So, but this, like I said to you, this is not in line with what we see the performance of our trade. So that's why we need to work further to really bring this integration into our beneficial. Maybe I would like to know my interest on fourth industrial revolution. This is when we develop our AEC blueprint. Am I past the 7 minutes? Okay, sorry. When we have this 2025 blueprint, this is new to us, but we know that we have to take care of this in our 10 years development. That's why we have this fourth industrial revolution. We know the engagement of ASEAN into the global value chain is still very limited in the very initial stage. Then we thought that ASEAN has to move as well. So that's why we really taking care of this, and we are willing to really engage on these all new initiatives. And because, like I said, we believe that this will bring ASEAN into the new states of development. My last point on our global ASEAN way of looking how we engage with all partners. So like Julia already mentioned, that we go through the step-by-step integration with our partners. So we first having this ASEAN +1 bilateral FTA. Then we move on to the bigger save of FTA, now RCEP. But also we acknowledge that we also have engagement with we call it, I don't know whether the right way to say, strategic partners. That we continue be guarded or assisted by our partners, although they are not in our FTA yet. But I would say they are all partners to ASEAN. Like for example, we have here EU, we have here Canada, we have Russia, we have one more, Russia, Canada, the United States. So I think I see the value of having engagement with those old partners. We learn a lot of new issues from our partners. So what I'm trying to say here is, ASEAN, if you see the performance is not really, how should I say, impressive from the perspective of trade in goods, for example, but I see the movement of ASEAN, because this ASEAN way, we said ASEAN way, how we deal with our commitments. We commit to have this, but we have to also taking care of our own issues. But we growing together. That is how ASEAN believes. So I hope this time is really beneficial to at least to let you know what is ASEAN trying to pursue in its integration on economic pillars. Maybe I passed already 7 minutes, maybe in discussion later on I will still involve. Thank you.
Thank you, Iguodala. Thank you for your kind words and also inputs on how we can move forward. Now, because due to time constraint, let me just invite the next discussion, Dr. Hati Tan Duan, who is an economist from the Economic Research Institute of Foreseen in East Asia. So before joining the area, she was also the research associate at the ADBI in Tokyo, ASEAN Development Bank Institute in Tokyo, as well as she did a number of consultancy works with different international organizations. Without further ado, let me just invite Dr. Ha, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to join Iguodala to thank and to congratulate the team at ASEAN Secretariat for this wonderful report. I find it very comprehensive, informative, and all the update information about the initiatives in ASEAN can be found here, which is great, and it would be a very extremely helpful resource for policymakers and for researchers like us to keep updated on what is going on in ASEAN and how we could design particularly for research institutes' perspective, how to design our research to reflect these development. As you have listened to Dr. Julia's presentation, the report covers virtually everything under the AEC blueprint, so we cannot really discuss on all aspects here. I would like just to pick up a few points that are relevant to, closely related to the work that our Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia have been doing related to ASEAN integration. So first, I would like to express the strong support regarding the translation of the international or regional commitments into the national actions. What we find is, as Iguodala has also mentioned, there's huge diversity within ASEAN in terms of the economies of scale, of the level of economic development, the production structure, etc. And the nature of the ASEAN way is based on consensus. So the non-binding nature of ASEAN means that it's very hard to move forward with a commitment, even if we have a lot of commitment, how to implement effectively has been always an issue. So in order to move forward, I would like to emphasize the importance of having the understanding from the AMS national level about the benefits that ASEAN can bring for the ASEAN's people, for the ASEAN economies. And from the perspective of area, we have done quite a lot of studies assessing the impacts of integration in general and ASEAN integration in particular on ASEAN's countries, on firms' competitiveness, on the benefits, the welfare benefits to the laborers. And although the evidence can be mixed, we find a very strong support for the integration towards the competitiveness of the countries. So by understanding the benefit the integration can bring, and also at the same time taking into account the different heterogeneity across countries in terms of interest and economic development, I think ASEAN can move forward better. The second point I'd like to note is about setting the goal. Now, I understand that this report would be the first step towards the midterm review that would be published later, maybe in next couple of years. But in setting the goal based on evidence, it's very important to look at the dynamics at the micro level. So all the statistics presented here provide a broad picture at the macro level, but the macroeconomic trend can hide a lot of dynamics in the micro under the firm adjustment and the labor adjustment. So in this perspective, I would think that the involvement of a third party who can provide an independent analysis and analytical work based on micro level data would provide more support to the assessment of the progress and the challenges under ASEAN. Just let me take an example. If we look at the aggregate level, we don't see much improvement in the intra ASEAN trade. So we often show concerns whether it's stagnation, whether it's a sign of slow progress in implementing ASEAN's initiatives. But on the other hand, it could also be, as Iguodala has mentioned, because of the different in the production structure or the similarity. Within ASEAN countries, we have quite similar comparative advantage. We have similar economic development levels, so consumers' taste may be more or less similar. The product differentiation and the product quality may be quite similar as well. So in that sense, the products could be more of substitutes rather than complements. And in that sense, it may be hard to increase intra-ASEAN trade to the extent that we expect. I understand that we have set the goal of doubling trade, which I'm not sure whether we can achieve. Let's see. So I think we should look at it in a broader sense, taking into account differences. And in an area, at this moment, we have just started the study, and it's still in the preliminary process, but we have a project assessing the impact of AEC integration on firms and labor markets in ASEAN using the very micro level data, labor force survey, the household data, and the firm level data. And we look at the utilization rate of FTA within ASEAN. So we also see that actually there's slight increase, although to some extent it's different across countries. So in short, in setting the goal, we should be based on evidence and should take into account different aspects of the economic development and the structure of the countries. Now moving forward, a few issues that I would look forward to see in more details in the next report on ASEAN's integration. First is the GVC. Now we have discussed about trade, and ASEAN has been very active in trade integration. However, the understanding the trade policy and the impact of trade policy, how we should shape trade policy in the context of GVC would deserve more attention and more in-depth analysis from ASEAN's perspective. For GVC, we need to look at technical progress in a broader sense, not only about AI automation, but also at the ability to adapt imported technology from advanced countries given the level of development in ASEAN, the access to finance related to the financial development and financial institution. The third point, very important, is the development of human resource, which is related to managerial skills, technical skills. Here I also like to highlight, apart from the initiatives that ASEAN have been doing, the opening of FDI in education services, the capacity building and the technical assistance and knowledge sharing among countries. And also more in-depth analysis on how trade policy can be transmitted along the value chain will provide more perspective. Because if a country wants to protect an upstream industry, it may affect downstream firms as well. So looking in the trade policy in the context of global value chain and how it is accumulated would be very important. And also related to the value chain, how to form and how to develop clusters, industrial cluster, innovation clusters, and regional clusters that require very good hard and soft infrastructure should also be in the highlight. So a few points from myself. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you very much for sharing your recommendation as well as inputs. Let me just now invite Dr. Gloria Pasadia, who is Partner and Business Director of Leadership Design Pte. Limited, a boutique consultancy outfit in Singapore. She has quite extensive experience working with the different research institute. I'm not going to provide detail on each one of them. She was also she also led the Philippine team in negotiating the services chapter of the ASEAN Australia New Zealand FTA agreements. So please, Dr. Pasadia.
Okay, I'd like to join my colleagues in congratulating Julia and her team for doing this magnum opus. It's a great work, it's a big work. I know, having worked in the APAC Policy Support Unit for 5 years, I know how much late nights you probably have to spend working on such a report. So many hours put into compiling all these type of reports. So congratulations. What I'm going to do is to talk a little bit about...
Sorry, Gloria.
Sorry.
Can everyone hear that? No?
Can you hear me? Okay, I'll probably speak a little bit, just put it closer. So, okay, so I'd like to give my comments particularly focused on the fourth industrial revolution. I'll talk about the trends in production processes that are induced by the fourth industrial revolution and the impact this can bring about on trade and global value chains. And then going into the public role in bringing about the developments in fourth industrial revolution and making it more productive for firms and the population. And in that regard, that also affects the agenda or that the ASEAN Secretariat does as an intergovernmental organization in the region. So first, on terms of the trends and production processes, the thing that we do at the fourth industrial revolution is that technology had become not anymore just a support for production processes, but really moving as a core of many business models. It has become, in a sense, center of many of activities of many firms. So much so that there's a lot of business transformations that are taking place. And in general, there's a tendency for greater customer-centered approach for production. So in this regard, the trend is towards more mass customization. There's greater demand for personalized products. And with the use of technology, the servicification trend that we have already noted will be accelerated. So with smart technology, manufacturing activities are turning into more service-based activities. Okay, so with all these technological trends, what are the possible impact on trade and global value chain, particularly global value chains, because this region really, part of that desire to integrate was really because it's part of a global value chain. And to a certain extent, I'd like to comment a little bit on an earlier comment by our colleague from AREA, where they noted a very little improvement intra-ASEAN trade. And I was just thinking that I was wondering whether part of this low increase in intra-ASEAN trade is because technology is also limiting the role of the global value chain, and it might change radically in the future because of technology. So because, for example, there's going to be perhaps a trend towards location decisions where the market, being closer to the market. So lower labor cost is going to be less of a concern. It was a concern before, but it has never been a major one. It's not the first concern. Usually for global value chain decisions, they look at market size, market significance, endowments, stable institutions, connectivity, good logistics, and open trade policies. But nowadays, more and more firms will be putting emphasis on the quality of digital infrastructure, these digital infrastructures that support greater automation and digital industries. So in that sense, this digital infrastructure is the new source of comparative advantage. Maybe in the past, there was a lot of emphasis, at least from the developing countries, on low cost advantage, low labor cost advantage, but more and more, it's going to be the quality of digital infrastructure that's going to be a very big source of comparative advantage. And related to this is the quality of energy infrastructure, because this too supports industrial revolution technologies. And then, very importantly, the skill levels in the population will be more and more a great consideration for location decisions. Again, also in terms of regulations of intellectual property protection, on whether they will look at whether their algorithms or their source codes will have the necessary protection when they locate. And very importantly, and more recently, the data policies and the restrictions on what they can do with the data that they use in their operations. So these are going to change the configuration of global value chains as we know it, as the traditional way we understand it. Also, if production goes closer to where the market is, market consumer is, there is a possibility that there's going to be lower measured trade. So in terms of total activity, it's probably the same, but the trade per se may be lowered. In terms of the measured trade, might be lowered. There's going to be change in trade flows. And the content of trade will also change. We have already mentioned about the increase in trade in services, more increase in trade in services, and possibly trade in new goods, goods that probably were not there before. For example, when you look at 3D technology, there's probably going to be an increase in trade in the input of it, in the ink that is used in 3D technology, which probably now it's not even in the harmonized systems of many countries. Okay. So in this regard, let me now go to the role of the public sector in helping developing countries and ASEAN in general. And also helping think about what next for ASEAN. I agree in the report that most of the action should actually take place on the national stage because many of the tasks that's at hand to develop the fourth industrial revolution is actually is on the national stage. So, for example, government will be useful, for example, in driving the infrastructure, particularly in the building of digital and the physical infrastructure, transport solutions, for example. And also, government is useful in at least even making companies do something. So, for example, in Singapore, where I am based, they gave subsidy for a certain period of time in order to encourage the use of mobile payments. So some subsidies can change some attitudes and some customer habits. Government can help in driving innovation by opening companies' eyes to the available opportunities and sometimes to create pressure for them to change. And then, most importantly, government is important in the legal and regulatory aspects. For example, in the allocation of liabilities on autonomous cars, for example, some of the rules are not yet there. Some of the laws are not yet there. For example, also in terms of resolving some uncertainties in contractual relationships, for example, in the control over data and liability over connected systems, also rules on the intellectual property rights or privacy issues. For example, there's a need here, especially in the case of ASEAN, in terms of convergence of data policies. Example could be like in one place, SMEs may be exempted from all the rules on data data policies, but in another country, SMEs are not exempted. So once the data gets transferred from one place to another, a firm can get into trouble because of the differences in the data policy. So there's no convergence in there. Also, government can help remove technological silos and also to improve work on cybersecurity. So some of the things that probably will need to be done in the future.
Thank you, Gloria. Now, without further ado, let me just invite Pak Anangga Rusdiono, who is the chair of the ASEAN Business Advisory Council Indonesia to share his private sector point of view. Please, Pak.
Thank you, Alex. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm representing ASEAN Business Advisory Council, ASEAN BUC. ASEAN BUC is highly appreciative of the launching of the 3rd edition of the ASEAN Integration Report and sincerely congratulate the ASEAN Secretariat for this great effort. It is indeed an essential tool to find out where we are insofar as meeting the AEC 2025 goals and concerns. AIR 2019 threefold objectives are highly commendable. 1, to update the public on the progress of implementation on the AEC Blueprint 2025 since its launch in 2015, based on the AIR. 2, to deepen understanding amongst ASEAN stakeholders and the public at large of the key dimensions of ASEAN economic integration for a more informed policy discourse. And the 3rd, to facilitate interactive exchange of views among the ASEAN stakeholders on ways in which the implementation of the AEC Blueprint 2025 can be further improved so as to ensure the achievement of the AEC 2025 goals and vision. Today I would like to share some outstanding issues and perhaps some perspectives, but without losing sight of the clear and formidable accomplishments achieved by ASEAN under the economic pillar. Just to sample a few issues on trade in goods. 1, ASEAN single window is the most symbolic measure under trade facilitation and up to now 15 years in the making and counting, with only 7 AMS doing live operation and exchanges only 1 document, Form D. As where is the other 3 AMS? How do we make them speed up their processes? Shouldn't we raise the volume of clamor? Those, I believe, are more relevant questions that perhaps need to be answered. 2, completion of national trade repositories, NTRs, is taking a long while. Linking of NTRs with the ASEAN Trade Repository is 1, while completing to populate the NTBs with meaningful information to make the ATR link effective is another. What are the issues? Translation requirement should be one faced by some AMS. What resources are needed to make it happen? 3, on the ASEAN seamless trade facilitation indicators, when will this study be completed and its recommendation to speed up customs processing implemented? As we know, this is one of the measures put in place to cut the cost of trade in ASEAN by 10% and double intra-ASEAN trade by end of 2020 from 2017, as set by the ASEAN Economic Ministers. Some outstanding issues and perhaps more questions. 4, on the ASIST, beautiful platforms for promoting transparency and non-binding issues resolution funded by the EU RISE Plus, but unfortunately hardly used. Enhancements have been introduced to make it very user-friendly, but still no tractions. Perhaps this is the matter best raised to us, the private sector, especially the business organizations who are established to help their members address regional trade issues. On custom procedures simplification, shouldn't we also be talking about computerization and digital transformation? There are patches of initiatives at national levels, but for as long as operations stay manual and reliant on human intervention in discretion, delays and consequent corruption will prevail. Non-tariff barriers, no clear handle. Despite issuance of the NTM's guidelines, we just hope that an honest-to-goodness enforcement mechanism shall be in place to preclude further increase in new cumbersome and protection-driven MTMs. How about the exciting MTMs which the UNCTAD said had ballooned to 9,000 from 5,000 in 2015? Will the existing NTMs be covered by the review of the guidelines? In conclusion, the ASEAN Integration Report is an easy read, which is already an achievement. I must say it's a very diplomatic report. B, it is accurately captures various initiatives covering launch of frameworks, programs, guidelines, and declarations. These initiatives are fully recognized and are designed in the right direction. We are grateful for them, which deserves all support from everyone. It is rightfully and honestly stated the need for more work to cover gaps moving forward. But in a way, it stops short of really identifying what and where the gaps and barriers are, and where the risk and impact of non-delivery reforms are. It is always good to inform, but finding out where the real gut issues are and where exactly can private sector help, who are supposed to be the beneficiary of AEC, from where a more robust public-private partnership platform can truly flourish. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Ananga. We always welcome the constructive inputs from the private sector. So we actually have very limited time. So maybe I can just open for a couple of rounds of questions. Maybe we'll just quickly see anybody have any burning question to the speakers. I see that some of the discussions also provide some commentaries and questions addressed to us. I guess Julia might want to address that, but maybe along together with some of the first question. Anyone from the floor, perhaps? Ambassador, please, both of you.
Okay, thank you very much, and congratulations for the launch of ASEAN Integration Report 2019. And it is very informative and very details mentioned with many matrices and figures. I have maybe 2 points to raise. That on ASEAN single window, I know that Myanmar is one of the last, but I'm sure that during sometime in November, we will bond to this ASW, and Laos will join towards end of this year in December. So after that, I think this ASW single window will be operationalized, and all 10 AMS will be there. And my second point is that ASEAN has signed with 6 partners, dialogue partners plus Hong Kong, FTA. When Timor-Leste join ASEAN in the short future, that Timor-Leste is automatically be as ASEAN airborne to this FTAs. Plus, we have now towards the end of RCEP. And RCEP, I do not know whether I'm correct or not, that RCEP is negotiations not between ASEAN and plus 6, but all 16 member states. In that case, I have puzzles that when Timor-Leste become ASEAN member, it is up to them to join at their convenient pace, or they must be in the RCEP. That is the compulsory or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. May I invite Ambassador Adepatmo?
Thank you, and join my my colleague Ambassador William to congratulate you for the report. It's very useful and very interesting. I read so many numbers, statistics. Some are interesting and some are questionable, but I want to on that matter. Actually, I just one question, probably not to relate it with the report, but it's more related as a whole how we ASEAN could be further integrated. And particularly when I read the report, especially in 4.R, but it's for other issue, is about cross issue. How, you know, because we facing a challenges, especially global challenges, and with uncertainty, the trend, and 4.R, and etc., etc. But how? Yeah.
Can someone?
How we address the cross-cutting pillar and sector, because everything is always integrated, as always, related to one another. There is no individual, and I think Julia mentioned we should not work on a silo, so have to get, how especially in SEOM, because currently we are discussing how we address the cross-cutting issue and cross-cutting pillar, and hopefully Budona could answer, and probably from outside ASEAN, from the business, the other thing, how you see that ASEAN can work in addressing cross-cutting plan. That's probably just my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Maybe one more question from the floor. If not, can I also just add, Julia? There's one question because we are live stream. So there is a question from Singapore. The question is coming from Jing Yuan. Her question is, what's the biggest challenge for ASEAN economies? Maybe we can try to address that as well. What's the biggest challenge for ASEAN economies? So I guess the two questions relates to the, I think the first question was about the how do we deal with the what kind of modality that Timor-Leste can see when it join ASEAN in terms of negotiate its participation in the RCEP and the +1 FTAs, and then also how we address the cross-cutting cross-pillar cooperations, and then also this question from Singapore, coming from Singapore, what's the biggest challenge for ASEAN economies? And okay, I think those we can try to address those questions first. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you so much for all the discussions. I think I learned a lot from the many inputs from all different perspectives, which I think is very, very important for us. Maybe answering the specific questions when it comes to, I think, starting on from the last one, but on the cross-cutting issues, the way we look at it, I think when it very much depends on the issue that's being addressed. On a much more focused but still cross-cutting issues, there has been existing precedents in place. So for example, I think when we were dealing with the issue on food safety, we have the food safety policy and later on regulatory framework. It requires the involvement of the agriculture side, the trade side, and the health side as well. So I think there was a task force being established to look into those, and the issue was also discussed in all the three platforms. Another more recent issues that we had was this high-level policy dialogue that we held to address new trade issues. So these are not conventional trade issues, but we note that it is something that is increasingly either demanded or at least discussed in the context of the FTAs, issues, for example, like environment or even like labor. And at that time, what we did was actually to bring together SIOM with the senior officials on labor and on environment as well to discuss those issues. But sometimes you may have major phenomenon or issue that actually requires everyone to discuss that. For example, it's the fourth industrial revolution, for example. I think for those, this is where we actually really need to think about the mechanism. It will need to involve the officials level, sometimes not just the senior officials level, the coordinating officials, but sometimes also on the sectors as well, but because the applications at the end of the day would have to be taken at the sectoral level as well. So I think there has already been a number of mechanisms there is in place. On the ASEAN Secretariat side, we are in the unique position that sometimes it allows us to have a bird's eye view of everything. I think in the way CPR also have that very important role to play. And we have these other cross-pillar mechanisms like the Joint Consultative Committee, our coordinating committee for each pillars as well, which I think can be a further leverage upon to address these cross-cutting issues. Responding to Ambassador Win-Win questions, I can only respond on the perspective from RCEP. Maybe the other colleagues can respond on the other FTAs. But on the RCEP and the guiding principles, there is actually a notion for like an open accessions once negotiations is being, and if you look at it actually, I mean once later on after the legal scrubbing and the signing when the texts are made available, you will actually see that there is some of those special differential treatment provisions that's actually made available to the least developed country party. But I think at the end of the day, what that special differential treatment may have to entail, it would be something that has to be discussed. I think even in the accession clause, there's a notion there that the terms and conditions are also to be discussed by the RCEP parties. But the way the agreement is done, of course, you have the legal agreement text, but you will also have these market access schedules of commitments that are negotiated by each of the party with the remaining parties as well. I think going back, I think then moving on to Pa Ananga, I think you hit the nail on the head on some of the things that we need to be further looking into. The trade repository is there. It's linked to all national trade repositories. The homework is how do we populate and improve the quality of the information available in the trade repository. And this is something that I know that the EU RISE is providing assistance on that, but it will require sustainability efforts from the national governments to make sure the different agencies are providing the right information. Similarly, I think on the single window, I think Ambassador Moon already mentioned where Myanmar is. The other two are the same part. They're at the final stage of joining the live testing. We are doing what we can to support them. I think even ASEAN Secretariat and even Thailand actually went to one of these remaining 3 countries to see what other support that can be provided in that regard as well. I think with the assistance from the projects also. From I think Gloria's intervention, I think you highlighted a lot of those very interesting points I felt about how the changes, the 4IR, the digitalization is going to impact on what we are doing now. You mentioned about possibility there will be all this new HS code, similarly with the services as well. The current services classification that we have may actually at some point no longer reflect what's happening in the global trade now with all the digitalization and taking place. And I think the point on the importance of certification is an area that we need to be looking into. I think you always bring this kind of, what do you call it, the research rigor to the conversation as well, the need for policy, of evidence-based policy making, the need to translate, to take into consideration the global value change realities into the trade policy making and see how that can be better reflected. And also, of course, the value of independent inputs towards the assessment of ASEAN economic integration as well. And Iguodala, we've been sitting in so many ASEAN meetings, SEOM, and then later on also the RCEP. I think, you've been able to describe to us what are some of the challenges faced at the national level, but at the same time actually convince us also that ASEAN is also looking at all these issues and we're trying to address that, including some of the new issues that's coming up as well. We have that questions from the social media, from the questions on what are the biggest challenges to generally to the ASEAN economies. I think when it comes, first of all, how do we actually finish the existing homework that we have in terms of implementing in full all the different commitments that we have in place? The second one is how can ASEAN be sufficiently fast, promptly respond to the different emerging issues that it's taking up. Some of these issues are not easily slotted into the ASEAN current areas of cooperation, so we need to find ways on how we can discuss this meaningfully and then provide response to that. And last but not least, I think it's the need for ASEAN, now that we already established as a community, to basically always take a holistic or community-wide perspective to respond to some of these issues, no longer responding from the perspective of each of the community pillars in silo.
Can I just invite if anyone would like to make a point, additional point?
Maybe I need to say something because Ambassador just say my name, so then I have to respond to you, sir. I think Julia already responded to how we will later on somehow coordinate the work on these initiatives that require engagement of 3 pillars in ASEAN. We, like for example, 4th Industrial Revolution, even e-commerce, for example, then we have to engage our socio-culture pillar as well as the political security pillars. But actually, Indonesia, during the ASEAN Economic Community Council meeting last 31st October in Bangkok, we actually, as Indonesia sees this, that we need actually leading agency, leading sectoral bodies, who will somehow oversee the implementation or whatever later on the initiatives from ASEAN on this issue. Then we need to really work day to day on engaging all the cross-sectoral issues. So that I think maybe ASEAN later in our meeting we will discuss this further, how to realize the proposal from Indonesia at that time. Maybe I would like to provide my view on the Timor-Leste, Ambassador, because you know, in our ASEAN +1 FTA, of course, this is initiative from ASEAN and our partners. So if for example, the way I see, if Timor-Leste is already joined us, because you see the initiatives there that need Timor-Leste, if they are accede to the ASEAN, for example, need to settle the whole issues with ASEAN. So then we will see whether this is already the time for Timor-Leste together with ASEAN to join ASEAN +1 or whatever. Of course, with ASEAN, we have to do it together with our partners in ASEAN +1. But RCEP, is, Julia already highlighted, this is really 16 countries initiatives together, with collective initiatives in RCEP. Then we have the provision for new accession. So then if Timor-Leste would like to join, then this for Timor-Leste to decide. On exactly, Pak Anangga, when you say this report become kind of diplomatic report, of course. That's why I add some more to the presentation of Julia, saying that we are in the process of implementing this. And I highlighted really the challenges, the struggle that we face although we agree that ASEAN has to proceed to these initiatives. But you know, we have to be aware of the situation back home in our respective ASEAN member states. That's why we somehow proceed our integration in ASEAN ways. We are not custom union. Like I said, I mean, custom union, you have to take it or leave it. But here, our promise is to bring as well, to reduce to narrow the development gaps. It's also our works. While this is not easy, that's why you see how we struggle, Pa. 15 years, 7 members, yet but this year, 10 of us, thank you, Ambassador, the push from CPR, that 10 of us will be on board on this. Really, Indonesia is the first country to really working hard for this and waiting for my other ASEAN member states to join us. So finally, after 15 years, now we are going to have this in operation. The transmission of our old export documentation can be done through ASEAN single window. On my concern, thank you to the AU for ARISE Plus on this assist. We work very close with your team, Ambassador, on this assist. And I realized the issues how to bring because the assist is the mechanism for directly to be accessed for private sectors. in any issues they face among 10 ASEAN member states. This is our effort actually to bring our intra-trade to be increased actually. So thank you to the AU, Arise Plus. But just when I observe what happened, you know, like I said, the level of development of ASEAN is different, it still have different level of development. And how should I say, we need to make, I hear Miss Gloria saying, somehow we need to do something. In this case, Ibu Gloria mentioned about the subsidies from government to somehow change the mindset of the private sector sometimes. So I see, because our private sectors, they are not get used to somehow access. If they have issues, they can resolve by themselves, finding out the way. We provide the mechanism, but they are not really get used to it. That's why I asked actually the Arise Plus to provide the offline exercise of this in our outreach activities back home. So I think the question is how to socialize, to make the awareness of the private sectors very effectively on the mechanism that is actually developed for them. So I'm struggling, I'm working hard. I said to my colleagues that the approach that we are going to do is really looking at the private sectors who are really already making business to our ASEAN member states and sit with them and show this. Maybe we cannot expect massive private sectors will use this one. We might very effectively to several of them, and hopefully this will be the success story. In the future, for example, that can be followed by others. That's how I see how to assist to make this operation. But really, I request Arise Plus to provide us the offline mechanism for us to show our private sectors how to make use this mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you, Borona, for your comprehensive feedback. Anyone else would like to add to that? Otherwise, I will open the second round very briefly. Okay. May I invite anyone else who might want to provide some comments, questions? This is your last opportunity. No? Otherwise, we have received also another question from anonymous online user who is asking what are the implications of India's pulling out from RCEP in terms of greater market access, and what are the key sectors that are affected by India's pulling out? So,
we need you to be here, sir.
This is an online anonymous question, so I'm just posing this to the to the panelists here. Also, anyone else also would like to add to that, or no? Your last chance. Yeah. Okay. All right then. Ambassador, would you like to?
Do you want to say something?
No. Okay. Julia, would you like to, or Iguodala perhaps? I think
Really, we don't know how to respond to this because our understanding is 16 of us will be there. So this is the understanding. But really, in our minds, RCEP is 16 countries. Although we realize that there are issues there that we need to further work with India, but then we really wait from the response from India, how to proceed this. Of course, the leaders already somehow endorsed what steps need to be done as soon as possible, because our intention is really to sign the agreement in 2020 in November at the latest. So really, we never thought that India is already out of this RCEP. So because there is no communication directly when we have the ministerial meeting, and even we have the joint leader statement, our understanding is 16 of us is there, and we need to further work with India to settle the whole issues. I don't know whether Julia would like to provide your views. So.
Just briefly, Bu, and just wearing the research head as well. I think at the end of the day, I mean, as Iguodala say, it's been a 7 long years of the journey, and for the 16 RCEP participating countries. I understand that all RCEP participating countries would like to see an RCEP 16, if you like. From the economic significance, India accounted for about 3% of global nominal GDP, and of course in terms of population it's a significant market as well. So obviously it's a huge potential, I mean not just for the 15 RPCs, but equally we hope also for India as well, given its important roles that it's playing in the regional value chain. But I think otherwise what you have read is what has been released in the joint leader statement, that we note that India still have some outstanding issues, and all the RCEP participating countries will work together with India to try and resolve that in a mutually satisfactory way. And India, a final decision will obviously be incumbent on the resolution of those issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Anyone else would like to provide additional commentary before we close this session? Gloria, perhaps, or you okay? All right. Sorry. So thank you very much again for coming to this official launch of ASEAN Integration Report. Before I end, let me just also express our appreciation, not only for all of you who are coming here, but also for our team who has also done a quite good job. Those from ASEAN Integration Monitoring Office, ASEAN Statistics, as well as everyone, all the involved under the AEC, the direct department, who have been very patient. That we have been bothering them, for a number of months already. So with that, please join me in giving a round of applause to the audience as well as to my team as well. Thank you very much. Thank you. With that, I will hand over the mic to FIFA.
Thank you, Pa Alex. Now, to show our appreciation for our discussants, we would like to present a token of gratitude to them. In this regard, Dr. Julia will be handing the token of appreciation one by one, and my colleague will help on this.
You are the presenter, and you are the one who provided.
Okay, perhaps we could take some photos. Okay. Thank you so much. We would like to invite our speakers, discussants, and moderator to return to their seat. Once again, thank you very much to our distinguished speaker, Dr. Julia Tijaja, and our discussants, as well as our moderator, Pa Alex. That was a very enlightening presentation and such an engaging discussion. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of the program. We would like to express our sincere gratitude and appreciation for your participation today. Please enjoy the light refreshment that has been provided just outside of the Nusantara Hall in your right side. And once again, thank you very much for your participation, and we wish you a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.